What is up, guys? Hope you all are having a fantastic day. I'd like to take some time today to discuss a condition that many people don't know about, including those in the medical field, that results from the use of psychedelics. And this condition is known as HPPD, or hallucinogen persisting perception disorder. Now, I don't see this condition being discussed much by the psychedelic community, especially in discussions about the dangers or long-term effects of using psychedelics. You'll hear people in the community dismiss myths like permatripping or flashbacks. However, HPPD is distinct from either of these things, and I don't see it being brought up a lot when reading forums or watching YouTube channels dedicated to discussing psychedelic substances or psychedelic experiences, such as Psych Substance. Obviously, I'm not blaming him, I'm just pointing it out. Now, this video is not to discourage or endorse the use of psychedelics, rather to draw attention to the existence of this condition. Alright, moving on. Alright, so what is HPPD? Now, HPPD is a disorder characterized by persistent visual disturbances following the use of a hallucinogenic drug. I'll get into that more specifically later on. It can be onset immediately after the use of a psychedelic, or days or weeks after, for some even months. It is a disorder classified in the DSM-5, which is basically a manual that lists official psychiatric and neurological disorders. Again, HPPD is distinct from flashbacks, which is what people describe as, reliving experiences from a psychedelic trip when they're not on the psychedelic. It's not what HPPD is. It's also not a psychotic disorder, such as schizophrenia or anything else. It's not a form of psychosis. People with HPPD do know that the visual disturbances that they experience aren't real. It is a I'm going to butcher this word, but it's a neuro-ophthalmological disorder in nature, and it is relatively rare. It's not common. So, a little bit more about HPPD. I got this off of a medical journal. I'll try to link it in the description below, but I'll just read it off the bat and comment on it. According to the DSM-5, hallucinogen persisting perception disorder is a psychiatric disorder that is distinct from the medical term palinopisia, which I will get to later on in the video as well. In hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, the inferences are often the result of the way the human brain collects and processes visual information. Average human beings who are not diagnosed with any visual disorders also experience and see light or some particles in the air called floaters. Again, I'll discuss the symptoms of HPP later on. When they stare at the blue sky or a lightly illuminated surface, these inferences, however, are normal. One of the main distinctions between normal visualizations and the inferences characterized by hallucinogen persisting perception disorder is the intensity and the frequency in which they occur. People with this disorder experience visualizations that are frequent and impinge upon their daily lives. Now, a lot of the symptoms of HPD are basically exaggerated versions of normal visual phenomenon, and again, we'll get to that in a second. I'm just gonna keep going because I'll discuss that later on. So, what is the pathology? What is different in the brain of a person with HPPD versus the brain of someone who doesn't have HPPD? Well, researchers aren't exactly certain as to the exact pathology of what causes HPPD. We can definitely infer, we know that it is a neurological condition. It's not in the eyes, so if you go to an ophthalmologist, they won't be able to tell. It is a condition that is a result of an alteration to the visual cortex. Now, the visual cortex is basically responsible for taking in input from your eyes in the form of light and using that information to render your visual field. the brain is a very complex organ. It, it's incredible that it even works. And yeah, so basically, it's believed that that HPPD is the result the of the of a disinhibition in the visual cortex, specifically a disinhibition in systems of the visual cortex that are responsible for filtering out visual noise and things that you essentially don't need to see. So your brain is a very efficient organ. It normally filters these things out. And another theory, or this kind of builds off of the original theory, but they think it is, or some researchers hypothesize that it's a result of hypermetabolism in the lingual gyrus of the visual cortex. Now, I'm not a neurologist, so I can't go too deep into this one, but yeah, so this is kind of what we know. It's not much, but we keep going on. So a little bit of background. The term HPPD was coined by psychiatrist Dr. Henry Abraham of the Tufts University Psychiatric Department. Now, he is retired, so that's why I used the term was, and he was the leading researcher of this disorder, and he's treated a lot of people with the condition. So yeah, moving on. So some common drugs that can cause HPPD. LSD. It's probably the most common one. Right next to MDMA. That's probably the next most common one. In fact, not like I'd say most people get it from LSD, but MDMA is a pretty common one as well. Another one, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms. It's the psychoactive compound in mushrooms. DMT. Now that one's rare. Like I don't hear a lot of like anecdotes while reading forums centered around HPPD saying that they got it from DMT alone, but there are some people who got it from DMT. Research chemicals or prodrugs. Now, there's a lot of research chemicals that basically, when you take them, they basically metabolize into compounds that mimic how classical psychedelics work. So an example of this would be like 1-PLSD. It's supposed to basically be the same as LSD, but it's technically legal in this gray area because it's actually a research chemical, not meant for consumption. A lot of people will say if you have HPPD, it's because you didn't test your drugs and what you had wasn't actually, out like real LSD, real psilocybin, or it was laced or something along those lines. That's not true. I took psychedelics for about a year. Between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I always tested my drugs, and yeah, I still got it. So that's not true. Some people say that they got it from cannabis alone. Now, this is really rare. What's more common is people say that either they mix cannabis with a psychedelic and that's how they got HPPD, or they took a psychedelic and later smoked cannabis and the cannabis triggered the HPPD for them. But getting it from cannabis alone is pretty rare. I have heard of it, but nah, it's not very common. I'm going to keep moving on. Alright, now let's talk about some symptoms. Alright, by far the most common symptom you will hear is visual snow. Now what this is, is basically characterized by flickering dots or this sort of static that overlays your visual field. It could best be described as sort of seeing like transparent old TV like static over everything you see. Now, I don't personally find this super noticeable. After finding out that I had HPPD, and I looked for it, I did sort of notice it, especially in it's more noticeable in in sort of dark environments, but it is the most common symptom for HPPD by far. Basically if someone has a symptom of HPPD, or just one, it's probably going to be visual snow. Alright, halos and starbursts. Now, people with HPPD tend to be very sensitive to light because, again, your brain, or the visual cortex, has trouble with disinhibition. So essentially, input of light stays in your visual cortex, or the visual cortex keeps rendering that signal from the light for a longer period of time. So you'll get these effects like halos, which are basically like rings around a light source. So if you, let's say you stare at like a street lamp, um, you'll notice, or like someone with HPD like myself will notice a halo around that light source. So like a ring around it. Starbursts can be described as streaks around light sources. This is really noticeable for me, like if I'm driving down a highway and there's a car on the oncoming lane, I can sort of see these like streaks of light kind of emit from the headlights as it's coming towards me. It's not like blinding, but it is noticeable. Kind of annoying, but it's not really a big deal for me. But yeah, if someone has this really bad, though, I can imagine that it would almost impair them, excuse me, from driving at night, which would, really suck. But thankfully that's not the case for me. Okay, prolonged after images and ghosting. So, like I mentioned from a previous slide, a lot of the symptoms of HPPD are exaggerations of normal visual phenomena. So, after images, you it's basically just an image remaining in your visual field after the exposure to the stimuli, or the object of that image is removed from your vision. So a good way to basically see what this is if you have like a light in your room, or some sort of lamp, just stare at it for a few seconds, like 10 to 15 seconds, and then just look away. You should notice like a dark blotch in your vision that will slowly fade, and within 30 seconds or so it'll be gone. In my case, it'll take probably about like a minute or two for it to completely dissipate. So like I said, an exaggeration of the normal visual phenomena. Another thing I notice is ghosting. Now this isn't super prominent for me, but I will sort of notice it, especially like for white text on a dark background, which is exactly what this image shows to the bottom right. I'll notice that the image, or like the text, kind of like a lighter version of the text transposes itself vertically on the original text, and this is actually like a pretty good example of what it looks like. But for me, the transposition of the text is on top of the original text rather than on the bottom. But yeah, again, this is actually something that can be caused by astigmatism or like other eye conditions. But yeah, it is a symptom of HPPD. Alright, now this one is by far the most annoying for me, which I'm thankful of, because it can get a lot worse than how, like, the intensity that I have it. But floaters are, everyone has floaters, right? Normal visual phenomena. They're fibers in the vitreous fluid in your eyes, and as light enters your eyes, these fibers cast a shadow on your retina. Now, normally your brain should filter them out for the most part. You may notice them if you're staring at the sky, or or like a light background, like a white wall. You might notice them. I've always noticed a floater or two since I was a kid, like really young. But I've definitely noticed an increase in them since I got HPPD. In fact, floaters are like seeing as many floaters as I do, and like how often I see them is what actually made me research into like why I was seeing them so much. And I came across HPPD and realized I had some of the other symptoms. But yeah, so again, normal, but someone with HPPD will notice them, or can notice them more. And that image on the bottom is actually a pretty good representation of what they look like. It doesn't look that bad for me, but it kind of gets the idea across. Alright, now palinopisia, or tracers. A tracer is basically the appearance of a trail following a moving object. So palinopisia is a condition where you will see trails following a moving object as well as like prolonged after images. So palinopisia in general is a symptom of HPPD. Um, for me, I don't really see tracers like in daylight. The only time I'll really see them is if I take my phone, turn on the screen in like my bedroom when it's dark, and like move it across my face. I will see a small trail following the phone. Again, for me, this isn't like super noticeable, and it's a very like sort of niche syndrome. Like it only happens in like very specific conditions, and again, I'm thankful for that. But yeah, that's tracers. Alright, distortions. Now, these are usually experienced by people who have like more severe cases. It might be experienced by those with like moderate or even mild cases, but to a much lesser degree. These distortions can include macro or micropesia, which is when objects appear smaller or larger than they are. Um, Objects breathing, so like if you like some people say if they stare at a wall, they'll notice, or like their ceiling, they'll notice like the popcorn, like if the popcorn ceiling, they'll start noticing like the popcorn sort of like little flakes start kind of moving or like shifting, or if they stare at a wall, it'll start like expanding towards them, retracting, like it like that would happen on like a psychedelic. But I don't really get this at all, or straight edges appearing to be wavy or fluid. So if you look at something that's normally supposed to be straight, they'll notice like waviness or fluidness. Again, thankfully, I don't really have this, but it is a symptom that some do experience. Alright, moving on. And finally, tinnitus. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know what tinnitus is. It's basically just a ringing in your ear that's like, kind of like a high-pitched hum. Some people, or actually a lot of people with HPPD, notice that they start to have tinnitus like all the time, and I get it sometimes. And again, it's just another normal phenomena. Like people like occasionally do experience ringing in their ears, but again, it's exaggerated by HPPD for some. It's not something I notice very heavily, but for some it really does get bad. Like some people say it's their worst symptom, and I can imagine why. That sounds like it could be really annoying, but I haven't really noticed for myself that it increased, but yeah. Alright, now let's talk about some comorbid symptoms, or symptoms that aren't directly caused by the condition itself, rather just having the condition. Now, the biggest one is anxiety. Now, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Like, if you develop this condition after, taking a psychedelic, there's a good chance you're going to be pretty anxious as to like what it is, and how long it's gonna like stay, and just like how you're going to treat it, like how it's going to change your life. Like it can lead to anxiety. So yeah, that's one of the most common comorbid symptoms of HPPD. Others include like paranoia and depression. Like some people get really depressed after they get the condition. I myself was pretty anxious when I first got it. I was a little depressed, but not like to a major extent. But yeah, like it's pretty common for people with HPPD to experience these. Alright, now I kind of want to talk about another condition and its similarities to HPPD. Now this condition is called visual snow syndrome. It's more common than HPPD, but still pretty rare. These two conditions are extremely similar, especially in terms of like the symptoms they share. Almost every symptom of HPPD is also a symptom of visual snow. And it's hypothesized by researchers in both fields that the neurological pathology, or like the change in the structure of the brain, is the same for both disorders. It's just that people with visual snow don't have to take a psychedelic to get it. It's just they're born with it. or it's genetically predisposed for them. Um, One of the people who hypothesized that HPPD is just sort of a drug-induced form of visual snow is Dr. Abraham. So yeah, that kind of tells you about how similar the two are. And one could assume, or at least I do, that someone who did get HPPD following the use of a psychedelic probably had a light predisposition to visual snow, and just the symptoms became more pronounced after the use of a psychedelic. Seems kind of reasonable, just judging by what we know about the two conditions. So just moving on. Treatment. Now, there is no universally acknowledged cure for HPPD. It's not something that you can get treatment for a certain period of time. It just goes away. For some people, that is the case. They've had success with certain medications, but there really is no known cure for HPPD. Excuse me. Now, due to the fact that HPPD and VSS, or visual snow syndrome, are rare disorders, there isn't a lot of research or pharmaceutical development dedicated to the conditions, and that makes sense. Obviously, if you're a pharmaceutical company and you're spending tens to hundreds of millions of dollars developing a drug, you're not really going to want to you're going to want to make sure that that drug has a large market. You're not going to want to develop a drug for such a niche market that you're not going to make a lot of money on. That makes sense. The symptoms can be aggravated by drug use as well. So, like cannabis, if I smoked cannabis after I got HPPD, it would really amplify my visual snow, for example, and my light sensitivity. Like, my visual snow would go from like barely noticeable to very apparent, almost to the point where like I could like see patterns in the visual snow. People with HPPD will know exactly what I mean when I say that, but yeah, cannabis really does intensify symptoms. So people with HPPD typically either lower their weed usage or they don't smoke at all following the onset. Caffeine for some exaggerates the symptoms, and alcohol does also. For me, caffeine and alcohol don't really affect my symptoms, but obviously, just in general, it's not a good idea to drink an ass load of caffeine or alcohol. So I don't really use either of those very often, but I still do drink coffee sometimes, or drink beer or whatever. Some have found that their symptoms decrease with the use of anticonvulsants like lamotrigine or Keppra. Now, these drugs are used as mood stabilizers, often used to treat bipolar disorder or even epilepsy. There have been studies done with lamotrigine that have shown, like, after the patient had used lamotrigine for like 12 months, she saw a complete cessation of her symptoms after like having the disorder for like 10 plus years. Like I said, these are like very case by case studies. There haven't been like any large scale studies done to show the efficacy of these drugs in terms of treating this disorder. One of the most common treatments, like in terms of like pharmaceutical treatments for HPPD, is the use of benzodiazepines, such as Klonopin, which is the most common one used to treat people with HPPD. It's been shown to be very effective at reducing symptoms, like temporarily, while the drug is still psychoactive, as well as treating comorbid anxiety associated with the condition. And that's probably like one of the biggest things it's used for, is to sort of treat the anxiety aspect that the condition gives the person. So yeah, moving on, SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and SNRIs, I think that's serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, and antipsychotics have also been used to treat the condition, with like very mixed results. Again, all of these drugs have been used on like very case-by-case studies. There haven't been any like large-scale studies done as to like what drug is the most effective at treating the condition. Also, a lot of treatment efforts are targeted to treat comorbid symptoms like anxiety. Some of these treatments can include therapy, exercise, an improved diet regimen, meditation, and a consistent sleep schedule. Just overall living a more healthy life can help people sort of overcome the condition and continue to live their lives. Um, like, and for some, this even like just improves their symptoms, like their visual symptoms. Um, but yeah, it is like you do need to um, sort of get your life together when you have HPPD. Like you need to make sure you're getting enough sleep, that you're eating right, that you're exercising. Like this is all like really important to in terms of sort of like overcoming the condition. Um, but yeah, moving on. Alright, some closing remarks. Like I said, guys, this video is not to discourage you necessarily from using psychedelics. Um, I really just wanted to draw attention to what HPPD really is, because I have not seen it discussed very much in the right context in videos explaining the dangers of using psychedelics, or dismissing rumors about psychedelics. Like this is a real thing. It's in the DSM manual. It's not it's not a myth. It's real. Thousands of people have the condition, and thousands of people suffer from anxiety from the condition, or even depression. It is definitely like a serious consequence of using psychedelic drugs and MDMA and those types of drugs. And I just think that just wanted to sort of spread awareness to this. If you're considering trying a psychedelic drug, know that you do not need a history, like a family history of psychosis or schizophrenia, to suffer long-term consequences of using a psychedelic. The only way you can really be sure that you'll get whether or not you'll get HPPD or you're susceptible to it, is by trying. So tread lightly, guys. Thanks for watching. Share this video to your friends if they're also considering taking psychedelics. I think everyone should have this warning, because I didn't when I started taking psychedelics, and I have a mild version of HPPD now. I wish I was warned, but that was not the case. I really blame myself because I didn't do the research, but hopefully this video makes its way to you and you take this risk into consideration if you decide to use or try a psychedelic drug. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day. Alright, I'm signing off.